Hello, and welcome back to Parley. These are my on-the-spot responses to the prompts you folks submit. Hope you'll enjoy listening. This one is from True Parley Grandmaster Foot. It's about intelligence, irrelevance. The year is 2026, and the concept of intelligence is irrelevant. Mr. Foot begins, "Hi, you might be wondering, what is this title?" Allow me to explain myself by asking another question. What is technology? The best definition I, Mr. Foot, have heard of technology is that technological innovation is the change that separates once unified concepts. Technological innovation is the change that separates once unified concepts. So, for example, writing is the technology that separated knowledge from memory. Before writing existed, those two concepts were essentially identical. With writing, there now is a difference. This holds for both abstract concepts and explicit inventions. More examples: clocks separate time from the sun. Law separates rulers from justice. Agriculture separates nature from food. Birth control separates pregnancy and sex. Autotune separates the ability to sing well from your singing sounding good. Photoshop separates looking good in photos to looking good in real life. GPS separates going somewhere from navigation. It doesn't completely separate those things. It pulls apart. Maybe I don't mean to nitpick you, Mr. Foot, just so the audience gets it. Like, obviously there was some gap between those, and we'll get into that. It pulls those concepts apart. It creates a gap, opens the door wider. I hope you get the idea. Yeah, I totally do, Mr. Foot. This is cool. So let's get back to the top. We're living through a time where generative AI and LLMs, large language models, are separating all kinds of concepts: artist and creation, effort and content, source from answer, thinking from writing, knowledge from the understanding of principles. Boy, we'll get back to that one. Human from worker, doctor from diagnosis, driver from driving, seeing and trusting, language from humans. But most importantly, it is separating intelligence from what exactly? This is my question for this parlay. What exactly is happening to the concept of intelligence in the wake of this new technology? This framework helps to explain some things, like how people run out to proclaim that AI is conscious. There are some people who believe that their chatbot is the same as a living person. And my explanation for that is that the criteria we use to judge consciousness apply to a concept that doesn't exist anymore. Instead, it has been separated into question mark, question mark, question mark, and question mark, question mark, question mark. This is, I think, the most complicated part of the parlay, and we'll get back to it later. This concept vision makes the original word bundles useless, Mr. Foot concludes, and we're forced to use better words for our changing times. So your task is simple. What exactly is being separated from intelligence? And then there's some stuff for later. Really cool. Had not heard this framework before. As I was saying before, I hope people don't get too caught up on it doesn't completely separate all these concepts. And it's not like there was literally no difference. But I think it's a reasonable oversimplification to say, anthropologically, before writing, remembering something and it being something humans know, we're much closer to being the same thing in practice. That's going to be a very important distinction for this parlay. I don't mean to nitpick at all. I think this is a perfectly fine framework, but it does matter what the details of this process, I guess, are. I don't want people to get hung up on, well, they were not the exact same thing. You know, cave paintings pull knowledge and memory apart a little bit for humans in practice, just not as much as writing pulls those concepts apart. Or you could argue that it pulls it apart more, and they were already very separate. But the important details here are, it doesn't completely separate them, it just pulls them apart. And I'm more interested in that pulling force and the force acting against it, the magnetism of those concepts together, because this is from the perspective of humans. Knowledge and memory were abstractly always separate. People just didn't think of them as being separate. You could have, and there would have been various benefits to doing so. Writing is a technology that increased the utility of thinking of them as separate enough that most people gave up on the oversimplification of thinking of knowledge and memory as the same thing. But they already weren't the same thing. That's, I do not think, a nitpick, a meaningful distinction where the meat of this parlay lies here. Because we don't have to use this thought tool, this framework, as a way to understand what's going on. We could instead say, Why do humans have this force pushing these concepts together? You could get rid of that force. After all, for each of these cases, there are people who did already think of the concepts as separate before a technology made them over a critical threshold of separate, if you like. It's just that most of the general public didn't. It does seem clear that while humans don't universally agree about these things, the general public or the vast majority of humanity kind of does. I think what you see is that people in private, statistically or historically, aren't very pedantic when push comes to shove. Like, if people genuinely think that it is more convenient, usually them saying, oh, but I just dogmatically don't want to think of these things as separate, usually that doesn't work out. I feel historically that's pretty clear. There is some threshold that humanity surprisingly universally seems to agree on. That's interesting, not completely universally, but like, all surprising to me anyway, it's surprising a lot of people seem to agree that these concepts belong unified or belong separate at certain points on the tech tree. That's already interesting. You could do a whole parlay about that. They do. That's a little surprising. Like, why? And I think I know why. And it's related to this parlay. This is going to be a complicated philosophical one. And it's on the spot responses. I can talk about this for 45 minutes on the spot, but I find that it's probably some of the hardest parlay to follow. So one of the things I'm trying to do to make it more followable is find ways to show my thesis, but not just say the whole thing all at once, which is a hard thing to do. It turns out those intro paragraphs that people make you write in school, while overly strict, like that's an overly starchy way to do an intro, you definitely ought to frame these concepts by leading with where it's going to some extent. So that's where we're going. I think that you can reveal a lot about this concept if you instead examine the sort of inverse of this concept. Rather than looking at the technology pulling the two concepts apart, I want to look at the force pulling them together. Well, as well, obviously, we'll still talk about the two concepts being pulled apart, because I think it's much clearer to understand what's going on there than it is elsewhere. And in particular, it's a much better way to understand the world moving forward right now, in my opinion, by looking at why people even want to connect those concepts instead of just splitting them apart. After all, we're in the technological revolution where it makes sense to separate most concepts. We're in the era of nuclear power and gene splicing and the very beginning of that era, maybe. But those things are on the table, and therefore, more than ever, combining concepts to oversimplify them just doesn't make that much sense. You'd probably be able to use the unoversimplified version because we have enough technology that you can often manipulate those things. Things aren't going to be like completely ununified ever. There are some things that humans, I think, existentially unify as a way that, at least currently, a lot of people think about the universe. And these are things that a piece of technology separating wouldn't necessarily change the human perspective on whether we want them unified, like purpose and life. For example, these are things that humans seem to be interested in tangling up in a way that I kind of feel like technology proving there's no point to the universe isn't really actually possible, or ontologically that doesn't really mean anything. And I don't think it would do much about the way humans try to behave about the universe. It would have surface level consequences. Religion would freak out or not, or push back in a way that looks like not freaking out but is. People would react. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that overall, I think most people would find that it has always not mattered for there to be a purpose for human life. People just don't think of it that way currently. Those concepts being pulled apart and that being proven would do little for how people act on the surface for that concept. It's important, therefore, that it's humans pulling the two concepts together, to me. There's not really anything inherently pulling these two things together in most cases. It's just that humans have decided to put them together here, technological revolution event, and now they don't decide to put them together, maybe, at some threshold that people surprisingly universally agree on. Got me so far? So that's what we're doing. Why do people want these two concepts to be together? Well, let's use AI and large language models as an example. Why do people want artist and creation to be together? That might seem like it's not worth asking, and according to me, that is the exact problem with all of the discourse about this subject. People don't seem willing to actually discuss why it's bad for these things to be apart. Even though it's obvious, it's not hard to do that. People just seem reticent to do so, and I don't really get that. I think that most of the problem is the human reticence to pull apart the concepts, not at all that the concepts are actually bad to have be apart. So let's take a look. Why is it actually bad? Or maybe it isn't actually bad, but obviously I've planned the parlay a little bit, so I know that I have some reasons for those two things to be pulled apart. Well, it's quick to say, the artist won't get paid, or it's stealing their work. But that's not an inherent bad or good on its own. We're not trying to apologize for large language models and generative AI stealing people's work. It's not about that. But you can't just say, oh, that's so obviously bad, it doesn't need to be explained. In a debate forum like this, that does need to be explained out, even if it would seem obvious, because this is science. This is chemistry, in a way, anthropological chemistry. It's an equation, and we want to see the causal chain of why people think that is bad. There is a reason. People don't just instinctually, well, they do instinctually think it's bad, but that doesn't mean there isn't a reason in their brain. They're just not saying what it is. That doesn't magically mean that there literally is no cause. There is a cause. And one of the causes, obviously, that people are worried about, I guess survival is the, deep down thing, right? If you work in in art in any form, you're I don't know, my partner is a concept artist. One of my close friends is a graphic designer. Excuse me, I got those construed the other way around. And so I have people close to me that work in these industries and therefore have been affected by this process. They didn't get fired, and the generative AI ended up getting kicked for now from those parts of their work. But it's not like I haven't seen this happening, even though I'm a sole proprietor, I'm self-employed, and this is my job. I've gotten a pretty good front row seat to a lot of this, which has been very helpful, by the way. That's glorious. Even though it's pretty annoying to see. It's bad the way it's being used, but what is the problem? Well, obviously there will be some amount less work. Sure. Is that it? Is that the main thing people are really worried about? And I would say, I think you can see that it isn't. I think that many people dislike the idea of the AI or LLM content in a way that doesn't seem to be sympathy for other people losing their jobs. One other reason is spam. It makes it possible to make something and put it out into the world that will be shown as if it is the involved task of another thinking human. But with our current form of generative AI and large language models, you usually get something much lower quality that is presented as if it is the same thing. So that's bad. That's just inconvenient. That means that if you're watching YouTube, you may, though I think at the moment it's usually pretty obvious, you may be served a video that you would like to be interested in, but unfortunately doesn't have real contents. There's those videos, if you've seen these, that are like, it's usually about something like space or some abstract scientific concept. And the video is basically just $10 word salad, if you like. And anyway, where for 20 minutes, that if you listen closely, it's not about anything. But to people that don't derive the meaning from the words, it might fool them long enough to get 20 minutes of watch time. And then that channel can farm a bunch of, views, and watch time matters almost as much, if not more, than views. And so the channel will do well. I mean, it won't really do well, but it will appear to. It will get lots of clicks, lots of ad revenue from doom scrollers, and this can make you a surprising amount of money. A significant known thing on YouTube at the moment, though for now, I feel like it's not a huge deal. Anyway, it's certainly not good, but is it that bad yet? That's bad. That's annoying. It's annoying. So sure, that's not good. But I think we all know that there's at least one other thing underpinning all of this, which is it's the human anxiety about the value of the human work. Of course, it's people feeling anxious that if this person's job is being feature crept by human technology, what about me? What about my security? I don't like to see the human being deprecated in value because I'm a human too. That's the sentiment a lot of people have, I think, very clearly when you look at the discourse around these subjects. To be blunt, I am disappointed to see how often the conversation is simply completely overturned by that human anxiety, but people refuse to acknowledge that that's what it is. I guess you can see why. If people were to say, it's not that it's so inherently bad for these concepts to be pulled apart, it's just that I personally really don't like it. For many people, it's like, well, if I don't acknowledge the difference, maybe I can just prevent it from being different. The human perception that these two concepts are the same until humans think of them as different is a lot of the culprit here, because they aren't. Effort already doesn't make things better. It's the thought that counts, can be a good way to give someone a gift if they understand you. But an artisan putting effort into something does not infer some magic additional quality to it that makes it better than things that are made by a machine. That's ridiculous. And I think that most people agree with that on a local level. They just don't like the implication of saying it that way, which is that there's no real point to the human doing it. This is my problem with this subject, that people pre-assume before being willing to investigate that if they were to open a conversation about where the human importance in something is, they would find that there wasn't any. Therefore, they have to anxiously reject the entire premise of the discussion of exploring the impact of generative AI and large language models. Because if they do open up exploration of it, they insist they won't like what they find. The problem happens when they take that feeling, understandable, and then say that feeling equals there is no difference between those concepts. No, what? That's a huge jump. I don't want the implications of these concepts being apart. I'm afraid of what I'd find if we pulled these concepts apart. Therefore, they are the same is a gigantic leap in logic that makes no sense. But for my money, for the beginning of the parlay, that is what is happening. It's that people simply refuse to see what the contents of these ideas are because they don't like the idea that human value would be undermined. But I think that's silly, and everybody ought to stop doing it. And Mr. Food is amenable to this, and otherwise it's my parlay. It's your parlay and my parlay, and we're on the board for that. So for the rest of the parlay, that's what we're going to do. What is the value of the human doing it? And the problem is that we can summarize, it's really simple, like that's not complicated. It's the journey part of the experience. But our society pays you for the destination most of the time, and that won't work out economically. But that's pretty much it. If you really like these tasks, then you, I would hope, are, and certainly can just do them and enjoy the meaningful part of them, which is doing the process yourself. And the main problem is money. Really doesn't have anything to do with generative AI and large language models and these concepts being apart and human worth being undermined. Humans are already pointless. There is no point or value in the universe. Ontologically, this was clear thousands of years ago, and I think most people deep down do understand that there's no broader goal. They have to figure that out for themselves. Even if they do something that on the surface appears to say, this is what you're supposed to do for you. I think most of those people do ultimately still feel the pressure of what do I do with my life? Because that's what it's about. It doesn't have anything to do with this anxiety. Like, people don't really want to have a ton of money and get a nice car. Those are anxiety responses to our confused backwards world, according to me. You don't really want to spend all of your money on these surface level things. Surface level superfluous things. Wow, that was fun. It's that they are a symbol of maybe everything's okay. I have a ton of money. I can buy an expensive car. Then the car is a physical totem that I can look at to see that I made a bunch of money and therefore it's okay, right? I mean, not really. You can't use societal posturing to make yourself existentially secure. You can try. Pretty much everyone does. It doesn't work, though. I mean, those people are all going to have midlife crises, which for my money, that's what that is. They realize that that is fake, basically. But that's certainly what people try to do. Again, for my money, the real problem here is just an unwillingness to tackle these subjects. A fear, an understandable fear, that if we were to go looking, we would not like what we found. But that's such an unbelievably pessimistic thing to assume, don't you think? When you look at it this way, it's like, you really think it's going to be that bad? I mean, there's no point to anything anyway. So If humans like the process of doing something, generative AI and large language models remove the product of doing the thing from being as valuable as it once was. And that was how we subsidized enjoying the process. You like painting and you can sell the paintings, but then if you can't sell the paintings, you might still enjoy painting, but now you can't like also convert the byproduct of that into money that you can use to support your life while painting. That's bad, but it's not bad because like it not being financially important is bad. That was never why it was valuable. Do you see what I mean? And I feel like people are really confusing that to act like that just because in practice that's important. You do need to care about that. We don't live in a post-scarcity society, and I don't see a way to get to one. So we have to make money somehow for now, or have a society where you are okay like that. And that's what's being threatened. That's bad, yes. But it isn't very helpful to insist that the thing that is wrong is actually not that, the valuable thing humans actually care about, getting to live through the process of doing the thing, and that instead the bad thing is that people don't have to dump effort into something. No, that's not remotely related. That is, I guess, my shtick. The people who are saying, oh, like human value or effort is being deprecated, either don't actually like those pieces of art, because if you do like that form of art, then you would enjoy doing it, not just having done it. And effort is not the thing that is important about that. It's engagement, you might say, that you experienced it. And indeed, many people who actually enjoy these activities are adapting by demonstrating their process. That was the part that was important to them all along. That's the thing that humans care about in the first place. And humans are just identifying that that thing is that way. That's another interesting way in which I want to kind of challenge this framework that these concepts are paired apart by technology. It's the idea that when you pull apart these two things, you're making them not less real, they're all constructs really, but less genuine. Like that thinking and writing ought to be connected. And therefore, if you pull them apart, that's like fake in some way. Hopefully you see the idea I'm gesturing at. I think people have this idea that that's less real. It's artificial, which is gestures vaguely bad to separate a creation from a creator. But why? It may be bad. There are a lot of bad things about that in this particular example, but it's not like inherently bad. The demystification of a subject from our human oversimplification is not inherently bad. Also, a lot of people don't word it that way. They'll word it as, oh, but people were never supposed to know these things. It is natural to have this specific level of knowledge. That's complete nonsense. Why? I mean, it's not. See, I can do it too. There's no reason you're giving for that. And I don't know what you would need to do to make that argument, which is interesting, would be to argue what is a good stopping or resting point for human understanding. But nobody is discussing that. We could. I reckon that we're actually pretty close to a human resting point for understanding. I read an interesting piece of sci-fi recently it was pretty far future sci-fi. And that was interesting because they were far enough into the future that their technology allows excess. You know, the rich planet at the center of the totalitarian empire is rich enough that they can afford to just have cars that drive on the ground. There's not remotely a need to do that with this technology level, but they can. And there's something quaint about that. This society, presumably, and presumably the author would understand this if I were to tell her, this society, presumably, has identified that this is a breakpoint that humans just like. It's not because we can't advance further or regress, if you like. We could have less technological convenience, but they've decided they like that specific amount. Now, obviously, to an extent, this is cultural sentimentality from our current cultural moment. If this author lives in the United States, which I don't remember, maybe, but you know, they live in the 21st century, like ground cars might be, as she puts them, might be rather nostalgic to have in your sci-fi fantasy world. Cool, fine. That doesn't necessarily mean they're like inherently the breakpoint for humanity, but you could discuss that subject. You would do it by claiming things like the way that we perceive a distance in time traveled from place to place. The way humans conceptualize space and like spatial memory, remember things based on moving through a space, requires some continuity. And so if you had a teleportation, I don't know, obviously you'd probably use that technology, but there would still be a lot of value that people would see in not using it, especially for things that were local. If it's not much faster and one presumes it takes a lot of energy, simply walking places would obviously not be like obsolete just because people can teleport. There might be something that humans just like about that idea. The actual cause behind that being the human can kind of perceive reality better. And since the only point of our existence is being along for the ride, a system which doesn't save you a lot of time, but which shortcuts the perceiving the existence may not be very desirable. Does that make sense? So I think it's completely believable that humans might want to construe concepts together despite having technology that would pull them apart, and that could be good, actually. I just don't think that's mostly what's happening now, because what's happening now is entirely out of anxiety, not out of some argument that it's actually better for those things to be together. People make arguments that it is better for the things to be together. I just don't think they're making very good arguments. They're making arguments like, but you have to have the human, like, deprecating human effort is bad. Because we all know it's bad, right, guys? And no, why? Like, there are reasons that's bad, but you have to say what the reasons are. You don't get out of jail free just because it doesn't feel good to most people. And I don't know. I mean, some people already thought of these things as being separate. I, for example, personally, really don't enjoy when I'm excited to share something with you all, and I have to go through the drudgery of doing things unrelated to sharing my idea to do it. I don't really like thumbnail culture on YouTube, for example. I'm making the video to respect your time and attention span and give you the whole picture from start to finish as I see it, as best as I can. I don't want to oversimplify the video, the only point of which is to not oversimplify, by putting a thumbnail on it. That's annoying. And then when I put it out, if the thumbnail's bad, any quality of the video be damned, it won't do well. Now, fact aside, I'm not that good at making videos. And at times in my career, I think I have unintentionally, but definitely like accidentally blamed that on, oh, the video's not succeeding for these other reasons. This is an easy thing to do, pointing the finger, but very quickly upon investigating it more and looking inward with myself, I was just frustrated that I was having a hard time in my life and YouTube wasn't behaving. Videos have randomly done well before, why do these have to not do well just because it's an abstract subject that the audience can't easily understand? But how about this? There is something good about needing to be able to concretify the subject before you send it out into the world. I mean, if people don't understand it at all, and you can't put it in a way they would understand, maybe you don't understand it. Defensively, I would like to say I do think we're working with really abstract topics in my other channels with the game design stuff and here. I hope you'll give me the fair point that it is unusually difficult to represent these concepts as a picture. That's a fair defense, yes? But still, fair enough. A lot of it is coming from the fact that I just need to make money for a living, and this is stopping me from making money for a living. So I would like it if you didn't need to do those things. But that's a separate argument from whether it's good that I need to do those things for human conceptualization. And it mostly is good, I begrudge saying. If there's an endless waterfall of things in the world, it mostly is good for me to need to do some work to give you a little encapsulated idea of what it is. That the encapsulated idea of what the video is this small, you only see 50 characters of a YouTube title, for example. Maybe that's not good, sure. Maybe the exact framing or structure of the algorithm isn't good, but the concept is not necessarily bad just because I don't like it and it makes somebody that probably, I hope, will go on to make things other people enjoy do less well. That doesn't mean that it is just bad for that to be that way, that barrier being there isn't good. This is a harsher way to put it. Just because generative AI and large language models creep a lot of the visual arts industry doesn't mean that's bad. It may be, it's probably going to be pretty difficult to argue either way. But making it so people who can show their process and care about the process, the important thing that is the real thing that humans actually care about, according to me, and selecting out a bunch of people who make art for maybe misguided reasons, wanting to make only a product, only a profit out of it, may not be bad. I don't have to like that conclusion. I don't, for that to maybe be true. But for most people, this entire conversation is already stopped there because they simply won't open the door any further. They will not discuss the subject of whether it is actually good for this many people to be making art in this way. Maybe it's better for less people to focus on that and only the people who actually like the process. I might agree that that's better begrudgingly. I just don't want the rest of the people that are trying it, innocently exploring their interests, to not have anything that they can do for a living. That's also bad. But that doesn't mean that the previous conclusion doesn't exist. We don't get out of jail free from that. And until everybody grows up about it, in my opinion, I'm kind of annoyed with the general public about this, and admits that we need to have an actual discussion about that and decide what humanity actually values about these things, the way we would want the world to be if we had the choice, which we now arguably technologically do. These conversations are a nonsense fest that aren't about the actual thing that is being discussed. Perfectly organized into 3 bite-sized 15-minute segments, we now arrive at part 3, which is the thing you darn asked about, which is what things are being separated. So intelligence from what exactly? As we discussed before, there's this framing idea for me where it's the human idea of intelligence, and so it's worth specifying what that is. And I think that the D&D model is surprisingly useful. There's intelligence, and then there's your wisdom stat. Intelligence here, I would argue, is nuts and bolts datum. It's information, it's data. Not wisdom, which is the implication, the implementation of that data. The problem as I see it is really pretty much just that people are confusing intelligence with wisdom in general. Studying the nuts and bolts of a subject just isn't very valuable in the 21st century. You could look that stuff up. You could build a chatbot that could secretary look that stuff up for you, potentially, and not be disrespecting a real secretary while doing it. The only valuable thing the human ever brought to the table was the implementation of those ideas, not the having of that information. That was just maybe you knew or maybe you didn't, but that was a logistical problem. Somewhere in humanity, someone probably did know. And we've created a system where you likely will be able to get that information if someone in humanity knows it, the internet, or large language models are not bad at this. They can often dig up sources that other people can't find. This is pretty much the only thing that large language models are useful for. But, sure, they do that. That decouples something like archives from finding data or information, which is really good to decouple. That's a very, very good decoupling. You could reword the problem again and say, the problem is that everyone is fixated on generative AI and LLMs doing things they're not good at, but they are good at doing something valuable. It's just that people are not focusing on that for some reason. The people doing anything valuable with these things are using them for, people know, it's not like nobody knows that. The general public doesn't think of it that way, but most working people who use generative AI or LLMs in any productive way are using it for this. Like, people already know that. Lots of misguided people don't, but they're just wrong that that's the useful thing about it. It is pointless to make money off of something you find soulless. You will be able to live your life day to day, but you will not be happy. There's no actual benefit to that. I don't want people to drop dead if they don't have a solution to that. But you can't just kick the can down the road and say, because there's this pragmatic concern, we can just pretend that all the implications don't exist. They still do. Maybe, obviously, when I put it that way. So the problem is coming into focus. Humans don't even understand intelligence properly in the first place. People were already connecting two concepts, intelligence and wisdom, in a way that isn't helpful, but almost all of humanity is being silly for the past couple million years or whatever, and has decided that that is a good oversimplification, but it isn't. It never has been, but people have just decided that it is. It's now much more obvious that it's not a good thing. And I hope that this is the obviousness bump that makes people realize that knowing a trivia point is not valuable. And you're a professional if you understand the context of information in your industry, not by merely knowing that information in the industry. It's the difference between a manual and a plumber that has read that manual. You don't need the plumber to have read the manual if somehow that could also include the wisdom to implement that information. It's just that it's easier to get that wisdom by at least skimming the manual. But it's not important that the plumber has memorized the manual. It's important that they've comprehended and implemented things from the manual. At that point, it's much more important to just be doing the work and have had that lived experience, not to have specifically bent over backwards to learn the information. So here's the question for this parlay. I said at the beginning, why don't people like that? Why do people dislike that so much? Here's my proposed reason. Because if that's true, which it is, then you can't just work hard to become valuable in society. If it's true that wisdom is what matters and not intelligence, which it is, according to me and all of the evidence I've presented to you, then working hard and just trying without thinking about it or doing it in a nuanced way will be revealed to be pointless, which it always was. It just wasn't brought into focus in the same way. It was always much better for people to just think through the thing they were doing, not try to objectify or earn worth or value by saying, oh, I put in all this effort and therefore I win, I'm valuable. I mean, not really. We were basically just forced to humor you all this time. And it's a really common bad example of humanity's attitude in fiction. You'll see someone with the logical or knowledge expertise that you need, but they're just an asshole, but you have to recruit them for, this fiction heist plot or whatever. And that's bad. You ought not to need to work with some jerk just because they have the information you need. The way that they implement the information is really what's important to humans. But thus far in human history, we've mostly been forced to put up with the people that happen to have the information. That this is going away is an excellent thing, a magical, beautiful thing. And it has the ugly, very significant, very bad side effect of undermining a lot of hardworking, honest people's work. That's bad. But attaching that to we need to put up with anybody if they have the information is really good. Getting rid of that is great. Or another thing would be teachers. If we could get something other than an individual to teach well, that would be very beneficial for a lot of subjects. Because for many subjects, it's rote enough to provide the information in a useful way that either maybe it's not that worth studying that at all, and it's better to just reference that information when you need it, or it's not necessary to get a teacher who may have an affectation that makes them a terrible teacher and will ruin all of these people's education, teach that. And we can just have teachers who actually want to teach things, and you have that option when you want to understand that wisdom perspective. That would be much better. We haven't yet gotten to that point, but a technology that gets us closer to that is very good. That it is currently not doing any of that and people are over-fixating on all these shallow things for it is very bad. But is that really because the thing is bad, or that decoupling these things is bad? Or is it because people simply refuse to explore what anything's actual benefits are? Because if they did, they wouldn't like what they saw about what a human's actual benefits are. Kind of nothing. You just have to decide what's valuable for yourself. People really don't want to decide what's valuable for themselves because it's anxiety inducing. It's scary, but you have to do it. That's life. There's nothing else to it. So I would argue that the thing that's being separated from intelligence or whatever this thing, the concepts being separated, well, one of them is basically the ability to pretend that those things are valuable is the significant thing that's being separated. A lot of these things are things that humanity's kind of fetishized, but it's been brought into focus over the past few hundred years. It's not actually that good for those things to be connected. And this is something that prevents us from pretending anymore, if you will. Another way to think of it is, let's imagine that all the people alive right now were alive for the past 500 years. You could at any point during that time have realized this on your own, and it would have been useful to do so at many points throughout that 500 years. But now, if anybody has put it off all this time, avoiding the existentialism questions that you unavoidably have to answer to live as a person, if you've put it off all this time, basically this is the final bell. out of time. Now we're just going to pull the band-aid off. That's how I'm thinking of it anyway. That's not good. If people are at an awkward place in their life, maybe it's not great to go think fast and flip the whole table on human existentialism. That's not a great way to do it. But to be fair, I think we all know that most people were never going to tackle that issue on their own anyway. And humanity does need to tackle this issue. So eventually being forced to tackle it maybe isn't the worst idea. It's just that there are a lot of surface level bad things about it, and our society is tackling it in the opposite of a delicate way, caring nothing at all for the suffering of regular people while implementing and abusing these technologies while avoiding all the things they would actually be beneficial for as their primary benefits. So, yeah, it's really bad. But I would say that the thing being separated is much more like the humanity from its pet ignorance about this, rather than like actually separating intelligence from the human. But if I had to give a more direct answer, it would be intelligence from wisdom, I would say. A very good thing to separate in many ways. It's just that it separates the perception of intelligence from the perception of wisdom, because the LLM is not actually intelligent, of course. So that's all tangled. Mr. Fruit, you have a spoilered out thing that is your own attempt at an answer. So let's take a look at that. This seems like a good time. Mr. Fruit said, I think what we're looking for is a word cloud. Intelligence is not consciousness, it's not identity, and it's not innate to humans. In fact, it might be much closer to basic pattern recognition than we thought. My conclusion is that artificial intelligence is a misnomer. Artificial implies fake, but that's just imprecise. It's not artificial intelligence as much as it is constructed intelligence. And we will have to come to terms with the idea that intelligence was never what made us human. Instead, it's something else that we had grouped with intelligence before it underwent concept fission. Sure, so I swear I didn't read that before doing the parlay. I think a very similar conclusion to what I'm making, right? It's that the idea of intelligence was misconstrued. Now, I've been pretty critical for most of the parlay of most people's very naive concept of intelligence, that just knowing a factoid makes you the virtuoso of a subject when it means almost nothing at all, and the best songwriters often can't read sheet music, like stuff like that. I feel like if you actually understand how to be good at things, it would become obvious very quickly if you were paying any attention that knowledge doesn't matter that much to that process in the 21st century. Intelligence, if that is like datum factoids, it doesn't matter that much there. But I think that part of the reason that people think that it does, let's explain it by approaching from the opposite direction. That ChatGPT is literally just a probability machine, spicy autocomplete, with like a bunch of masks and skins to make it look like it's more than that. That's crazy. Just that is enough to create the feeling of the coherent human speech. Say what you want about these technologies, but they do a fairly good job of reconstructing what looks like human conversation, given in pretty regular and stringent patterns at the moment that can be easy to recognize once you know what to look for. But that's all it takes to do that? That's a little surprising, isn't it? I think it's fair to say that even for people who've actually thought about this, and statistically probably you, dear listener, you're listening to Parlay after all, it's not entirely clear that that was enough to create most of the feeling of human meaning. And it's not, but let's just say from the outside, it is a little bit unclear what exactly cannot be done by the chatbot. Let me give you an example. So I did a writing exercise where I sat down and wrote a piece of prose, and my goal was to demonstrate the human element in writing. So I wrote an assassination scene. Someone was in a bell tower, and they were sneaking up on, an unsuspecting priest of a corrupt regime to stab them in the back, and something fiction being negative about religion. It doesn't matter. It was a writing exercise. I'm not going to write that as a story. That's overly simplistic. And while they were behind the shadow of the bell tower, I imagined a beam of moonlight striking the bell tower and the dust that might be up there, and how this could remind the assassin of their childhood as a baker, Don't laugh. This is what happens in fiction, right? In that moment, they remember something tender, something they are about to kill in themselves by taking another life, is the trope anyway. I'm not the hugest fan of that trope, but that wasn't the point of this exercise. And then, the vision fades, they steal themselves and stab the person. The idea being that that type of thing, that seemingly not clearly prompted instinct, to put something like that in there, is the human element that people so talk about. People are so quick to say, this machine won't add the human element. I told you about that culture in Japanese handicrafts story. Did we talk about that? Anyway, with the machine cutting a stencil for beautiful kimono patterns, and the show had just finished saying how proficient it was, to then turn right around and say, but there's a human element you can't get from. No, you just demonstrated that, of course, there isn't any human element that couldn't be captured by the machine. That would only ever be a failing of the machine to be able to do a certain function. The human does not provide a magic sauce to the kimono. The human has a human touch that looks different from a machine if it isn't sophisticated enough to replicate that touch. Obviously, there can't be anything else that's being added. Obviously, there's a context of including the thought that went into it, but most people wearing the kimono would not know that. That would only be like, if I made you the kimono, you would know that I put effort into it, which may add value. But if I lied that I put effort into it and you never found out, that would of course be the same thing. I just don't think that's a very good thing for me to do, so I won't do that to you. You see what I'm saying? Okay. And then I asked ChatGPT to demonstrate the human element, and it said, I can't, because, it's like when the human has the instinct to do the thing. And I said, but you did tell me that that's what the human element is. Yes, it said. And you do work by construing how common it is when this string of words is present, for it to be followed by these other words. Yes, it confirmed that is how ChatGPT works. So you would be able to statistically represent that the human element is like occurring statistically around these climactic scenes, right? There is a pattern to when the human element is added. It might be a little obscure to us, but I don't believe that it's obscure to the system we call ChatGPT. ChatGPT's response that it spat out was no. And the reason is that it's not statistically significant enough. And that's what's weird. Human writers often add nuance by not doing this, or doing this at a statistically insignificantly common point. And that's the human element. And I said, something seems off to me. You can explain this you wouldn't be able to know that if it was statistically insignificant. After all, that's how you work. That it's a probability machine. So I thought about it for a sec, and then I typed in a prompt that was basically like, write me an example of this happening. Write a passage where there would be this human element without it, and then add it in. And it did, of course, because that's how it works. Even though it had just said and explained meaningful reasoning, like that does make sense. Like maybe the human element isn't easily represented statistically, and the trick is when you implement it, and that's actually pretty inconsistent. That could be true, I don't know, but upon looking at the data by asking ChatGPT 2, that is not true. It was able to do almost the exact same thing that I wrote. I wrote it the scenario, and it even went down to replicating the bakery. That's just a really obvious thing to do. The flour in the air and the dust around the bell tower. And it's a church with a bell tower. It's like a rural-ish fantasy setting, right? That's a reasonably obvious thing to do, and that's why I wrote it this way, to be stereotypical. And wouldn't you know it, that is almost the exact thing that ChatGPT produced when I sent in that prompt. So what's going on here? I responded. You demonstrated and claimed that you can't do this, but then you just turned around and easily did it, which of course you can. And not only was ChatGPT able to do that, I was able to figure out that ChatGPT would probably be able to do that by digging into, wait, but like, what actually is this? And what is the real contents of that thing humans are doing? It's not that special, and that's fine. That's fine. It's great, because everybody has a different perspective, and I want to read your book that you're going to write. It's not important that it be hard to write a book. Who cares? Why are people so hung up on that? Just let everybody write a book. You don't think that anyone is going to write something interesting just because it's like really easy? I also think people feel like if an art is easy to enter, then nobody will take it seriously or hone it. Completely untrue. That's preposterous. There's many examples of the exact opposite. Access makes arts deeper, almost always. And the only thing that makes an art die is a lack of access, pretty much, I would argue. So what happened in this moment? So another answer, that's why I brought you all this way. Intelligence is being decoupled from impetus. That's the thing that is being decoupled. When a human uses ChatGPT or Midjourney or whatever to prompt the creation of something, they're not creating it themselves, no. But there is a human element that is there that the chatbot or whatever is not replicating, and it is the impetus to prompt that thing. Another experiment I recommend you try if you ever maybe just don't use these things, but if you ever bother, you might as well use them to learn about them, is trying to get something like ChatGPT to play D&D. It's surprisingly effective at this overall. Having an effectively eidetic memory for all of the features of the game is good. Construing what version everything in the game is from is bad. Those are some of the things that will happen if you do this. But the biggest problem is that you'll notice an eerie lack of, like, you can't really get it to do things of its own accord. It's very difficult to get the chatbot to direct things anywhere without you having been ultimately the origin of directing it somewhere. Yes, if you ask for advice about something specific, you'll often get what seems like an opinion or a slant. You can, by having a certain tone, get ChatGPT to pattern recognize that this is somebody who will accept a dissenting opinion, and then it will spit one out. And if you take a different tone, it will not provide a dissenting opinion. This is something that ChatGPT can do that's pretty fancy and might be a little bit more than just like recognizing patterns in text, but that's something a smart human programmer made, I think, anyway. And if not, that's pretty amazing that an LLM process can do that. But anyway, but generally when it provides that dissenting opinion, it's only part of, like, you basically did invite the dissenting opinion. By the tone of the way your prompt was presented, you did say to give me a dissenting opinion, just you said it in the language of language statistics, not like plain English. You didn't say disagree with me, but you said, what do you think? Like, could it be this or might it be some other conclusion? Let me know whatever you think. That tone is enough that ChatGPT will go, that in statistics language, that means give dissenting opinions if I have them. You were the impetus for ChatGPT to disagree. It's just not immediately clear that that's what the impetus was. So I would argue those are the three answers that I like. The idea that intelligence is being decoupled from wisdom, if you want to think of it that way, that it's being decoupled from impetus, or like the motion, the mode of action, the active point, I don't know, the inciting incident of doing something. That maybe is being separated, and that it's not intelligence at all being separated. The primary thing that these things are separating is actually just humans from their supposition that they can get away with not engaging in existentialism for a long time. This isn't the only thing that is pulling those concepts apart, but it's a pretty big tug, one of the biggest in human history, in my opinion. It's an interesting time to be alive. This will probably be a very ugly and unpleasant growth period of like 50 years that's gonna kind of suck. I don't know, maybe. And then there will have been many positive benefits to that too, or we'll all be dead. So good either way, really, right? Am I right, gamers? I don't know, but that is honestly how I think of it. And I feel like it's much easier to think of these subjects by just admitting that there is no stable base of human meaning and value. There doesn't need to be. You wouldn't want there to be, because as soon as you have your own ideas and values, that would turn right around and tell you you have to not value that stuff instead, and you should instead think these things are important. Thankfully, that's not the case, so you can value whatever you want. It frustrates me that people are so addicted to the idea that there needs to be some cosmically ordained reason for us to be important. And if there isn't, that means like it's bad. Anybody actually interested in their life would think that's good given enough time. And so, extremely aggressively, I'm trying to provide a devil's advocate positive position. Maybe one needn't be so pessimistic about these things. Without having hand waved, I hope we spent enough time gesturing at. There are plenty of like in the moment bad things about these technologies existing. It's not primarily a good thing. I'm just saying, since we can't really do anything about it existing at all, though it's great to push back wherever you can, because most of the problem is how the bad rich people are implementing and using these technologies. Push back against that, that sucks. But obviously the concept can't be put back in its box, and I don't think it's good for it to be. The concept is a very good, healthy part of the teenage growing up phase for modern humanity. That part is ugly but good. But the ground implementation, where it's not being used for anything remotely useful for actual humans 99% of the time, wasting a ton of resources and ruining a ton of people's livelihoods and, you know, domestic lives, like data centers creating so much heat that they're changing the climate of an area. Like, that's one of the worst things ever. Gestures cosmically, just in general. That's all very bad. But none of that is really what the thing is from an ontological or broader human perspective. And who knows how we'll work all this stuff out. Maybe we won't, and it will be really bad. But that changes nothing about the overall conclusion, which is that, yeah, I mean, this is a step on understanding ourselves as people. You can't just pretend forever in human society that it's by magic valuable for things to require a bunch more effort than they actually could cosmically. That isn't just magically the way things are forever, and we do need to be willing to adapt to this brave new world where we understand those concepts being pulled apart. Mr. Foot added a bunch of additional notes, which I think are cool and worth your time, so I'm going to read them and put them in the description for you. Mr. Foot says, just to be clear, none of these are required reading. I thought they would be interesting as further reading, watching materials for those who want to dig deeper. I read the blog post. I thought that was a nice way to demonstrate the concept you were describing another way. Mr. Foot says, I originally came across this idea of concept fission, separating this from that, from this blog, linked in the description, which in turn got the idea from this video, also linked, which use sources I won't bother linking, but you can find them easily. The video is longer than it needs to be, but if you want to learn more, it's probably the best starting point. Also, on a somewhat unrelated note, this is a fascinating video about the Japanese researcher that separated self-awareness from intelligence in animals by proving that the same species of dumb fish are actually self-aware, according to our current testing criteria. That's in the description as well. So I haven't watched that yet. That sounds interesting. I'll take a look at that. Note the framing, right? Self-aware according to our current testing criteria. People are very quick to say, if we call this concept this, and then with that current testing criteria, it's proven to actually be that, not this. People are very quick to forget that we just arbitrarily decided what this thing means. And so that we would be proven wrong could as well mean that our arbitrary definition was just bad, not really that anything additional has been demonstrated. Are the fish actually self-aware in a way that means something to our understanding of self-awareness? Or was our definition of self-awareness and testing criteria just flawed enough that there's an exploit available, basically? And the meaning of the study is completely different and unrecognizable unless you take that into account. But people are way too quick to posture to authorities. So when this happens, I think usually the general public makes the mistake of just saying, therefore, it's proven that fish are self-aware in exactly the same way that we intuitively mean. Like, not at all. We haven't remotely demonstrated that. I mean, well, maybe, I guess we'll have to see. But on its own, that doesn't demonstrate really anything. It could just be that people have a very short-sighted idea of that thing. You know, if people with more money are statistically more happy, that doesn't mean that money makes you happy. It probably just means that people are happy if you just leave them the hell alone, and money makes it more likely you can be left the hell alone, for example. But people are very quick to say, because happiness was tested that way, that is the objectively true thing about happiness. And now is what I think happiness means. Like, what? Wait, no. What? How? Where did that happen? You got mind controlled to agree with their idea of happiness? Mr. Foot says, just to be clear, P.S., my views on AI are not exactly favorable, for a plethora of reasons that we don't have time to get into. That being said, the question regarding intelligence, as stated above, keeps popping up, and I think it hinders discussions on the topic. So hopefully I tackled that in a way that you resonate with, but I totally agree about the sentiment. And a great parlay for doing that. I think that not diving into the subject is the reason that discussion on it has been so unproductive for most people. Again, as I've said in many of these AI parlay, if you want people to dislike AI, you want this conversation to happen because this is the real bad thing about it, the way people construe concepts, not that making things take less effort if you don't want them to take effort is bad. A lack of post scarcity is the thing that is bad. Anyway, and that's only getting worse with the way people are using this thing. Anyway, so that is a symptom, but that's not the real bad thing. It's not a threat to human happiness or existence. Money is the threat to human happiness and existence. Or you could blame many other things. Intelligence and money is an interesting one. Go figure. What a glorious parlay. I hope you felt like I did it in an effective way. This was definitely one of those parlay where I sort of started with reframing it a way I think is very helpful, bouncing off of your way of reframing it, which I also thought was very helpful, and then using those as instruments to figure out maybe what is an easier way to get our heads around this in a way that has productive, useful conclusions. Because that's the biggest thing for me, right? Like a huge disconnect with this problem is that a lot of people are construing these concepts out of convenience, but actually the construing of the concepts is itself the thing obscuring the discussion. And so it's a place where I feel most people make the excuse that they're about the same, but what they're really saying is, I'm just lazy and I don't want to pair them apart. That's fine, but if it's a discussion where we're pairing them apart, maybe just don't have that discussion. A sort of hallmark of my career and the way I do my work is, why don't we create a space where you just never need to oversimplify? And if you're ever in a situation where you would only be able to respond by oversimplifying, literally just don't. Just don't ever participate in any of those situations. You can do that if you're on Twitter or a platform with a meaningful character limit. Stop using it because you can refuse to be in a conversation where you don't have to, where you have to oversimplify. And if only people were willing to do that, that would remove a solid 33% of the issue right there. Simply refuse to communicate when you can't not oversimplify. People ask you something offhand at a wedding, and you say, "What's your job?" And I say, "Can I, practically speaking, oversimplify?" Usually what I do is tell them that my job is just the parlay part of the job. Explaining the video game channels is too complicated. And so I oversimplify by saying this. That gives them the idea without me lying. And that part can be explained without oversimplifying. It's kind of an a la carte podcast service, but kind of a subscription where I chew on an idea that you were interested once a month. That's close enough to the idea. But I mean, I have had people respond to that by going, "Oh, can I have a card?" And I went, "No, that's not how the economy works I could make business cards, but that would have a negligible drop in the bucket impact on my business. That's probably not worth doing." There's also various other problems with doing that we could get into sometime. That's not what this parlay is about. But the point is, to them, okay, but then it's not a business. All right, that's an unhelpfully oversimplified, kind of ignorant in the 21st century way of thinking about business. But okay, I certainly am not confused about what happened when someone says that, right? They have a inferior oversimplification that means they won't engage with the subject because they've decided it's enough to just say this is that. And if you're just willing to not do that, it largely solves out all of this stuff by itself. A key thing for me that I feel like I didn't unpack in a good way, and I don't know how to, I guess I won't say more about it, but just to say, I feel like you could do more with, people could have thought about this at any time. Why did some people consider this previously and are therefore ready for this existentially, but most people didn't? Why did I think about that? And other people did too, but why? What was the distinction? Was it just privilege? Was it just because we had a lot of time to do it? Whatever you want to call my situation. This is my job, and so I have way more than most people time to professionally feels like the wrong word, think about these subjects. So is that all it was? And would everybody be doing that if they had the time? I think it's clear that they would not, though more people would. Some people would. But lots of people, if you gave them 500 years, they would never tackle this. So why not? Or why would some people? Feels significant. That sort of feels like that's the question under this question. But we'll have to invent some technology that pulls those two things apart too, won't we? Thanks to the cool parlay. If you want to get your own parlay like this one, you can do that using a link in the description. We went a bit over this time, but I try not to be too strict about them because this isn't that efficient of a way to make money. I like doing this, you know? And I know a lot of folks pay me there just to support the show, so just thank you very much. See you in the next one.